Welcome to Between the Briefs, a podcast by Steno. We share practical tips and expert insights on the pretrial process, court reporting, and legal technology to keep you updated on how technology is revolutionizing the litigation process and the wider legal sector. I'm your host, Adrian Cea. Hello, and welcome to Between the Briefs, brought to you by Steno. I'm your host, Adrian Cea, and today we're diving into a fascinating world of litigation support with a true expert in the field. Joining us is Kassi Burns, a distinguished attorney with over a decade of experience at the forefront of artificial intelligence law, machine learning, and legal technology. Currently a senior attorney at King and Spalding, Kassi specializes in helping clients navigate the complexities of AI governance and compliance. With a robust background in e-discovery and managing complex litigation, she has become a thought leader in the legal industry, contributing to publications and speaking at major conferences on critical topics like legal ethics in AI and the evolving role of technology in the legal sector. Today, we'll dive into how technology is revolutionizing the litigation process and the wider legal landscape. Kassi, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I am doing well. I appreciate the invitation to be a guest on this podcast.
Of course. Well, when we first got started, I was fascinated by your background, especially in AI and how much content you've written about it and just your overall knowledge on it. So I just want to dive right in. Tell me more about what you think about AI and discovery. I know you have a lot of experience with this in e-discovery in particular. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we have been using AI vis-a-vis machine learning in discovery or e-discovery for over 10 years through a process called TAR, Technology Assisted Review. It's a very robust practice, a robust workflow that's refined over time, but it's something that has been addressed via case law, whether or not it's something that can be used as opposed to having humans do all of the work. And pretty much what that TAR workflow is like, you have your corpus of documents that have to be reviewed to determine what gets produced to the other side in litigation. And you use an algorithm that identifies based off of coding by humans. It creates and pushes a relevancy rank to the remaining corpus of documents that then gets validated by humans, and it can be used to either cut off review or prioritize review. Stepping back big picture, it means we've been using AI, again, not necessarily generative AI, but AI for over 10 years in an adversarial setting, meaning we have to be able to stand by our work product. We have to document, sometimes we have to negotiate the use of it. We have to be able to validate on the back end, or else the other side is going to come back to us and say, you didn't do this right. We get another bite at the apple. You need to produce more documents. So then I think when we think of the integration of generative AI in discovery, so that might be creation of initial descriptions in a priv log as the generative AI output. In a lot of ways, that's a natural progression because we in the e-discovery world have been using AI for a while. We know the pain points with it. It's not always perfect. We understand that process to defensively use the tool. So it just makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways.
I can imagine. Now, for anyone listening, I think if you're already acquainted with AI, it makes a lot of sense, like you mentioned. But for those who aren't as well versed, and you were to have to break it down in layman terms, how it can help with e-discovery, how could you go about that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is volume, scalability. Generative AI has great harm that can come from scalability, but it can help in a lot of ways. And something that, without a doubt, the volume of data being created by clients or just us as human beings is growing at an exponential rate. And so that creates a burden on parties in litigation because in the US courts, they have very broad application of what could be relevant. And so we're talking about potentially terabytes of data that have to be reviewed, millions of documents. Sometimes, realistically, there's minimal value in some of those documents. So how can we use technology to maybe cut away the junk from what could potentially be more relevant and have human attorneys looking at those? So it's creating efficiencies, like having machines identify the more likely responsive, less likely responsive. And so we can get through that corpus of documents more efficiently, because at the end of the day, when you're thinking of litigation, it's a much smaller set of data that becomes very relevant and that can even be used in trial. You may only be able to have 100 exhibits at trial. So I think it's that funneling down from a very large universe to a more narrow universe. And how can we leverage technology on the front end to minimize that lift from the humans?
So you mentioned this point of a large universe into a smaller one, right? So you got all these complexities of AI, trimming the fat of all the things that could be just not useful for attorneys in their process. And AI can figure this out and help improve their legal workflows. But for an attorney looking to implement this into their current law firm, what kind of tool could they use to actually make this a reality?
I think that when we're talking about e-discovery, there are existing well-known software providers out there. Relativity, Reveal, Everlaw, so many of them out there, and they're really looking at, we're going to add in generative AI on top of our already existing tools. So they're known entities. You may have already used them, and they've already probably been vetted by the firm's security committee. So there is that known quantity there. And stepping back and thinking of, what about just like your day-to-day creation? Not everyone is going in a database and reviewing documents. There are some generative AI tools that are becoming available that are more word focused or creation of document focused or legal research focused. And again, we're seeing existing companies, Westlaw, LexisNexis, integrating those into their existing platforms. Microsoft, of course, with Copilot, which has a chatbot for each of the different Microsoft tools, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, email. So again, those known quantities, that could be an entry point for a lot of legal practices.
I see. So it could be a great entry point, like you mentioned. I think one thing that needs to be stressed here is the why, right? So what is the true need? A lot of law firms right now still do e-discovery very traditionally. I think they do a lot of the record keeping on pen and paper, or with a court reporter, they get all the transcripts. So what would you say the biggest need is when it comes to the lawyers and why they should even bring in AI to begin with?
I mean, I think going back to volume, sometimes you don't need AI to do the work. If the volume is small enough, assuming that your collection processes are, forensically sound and all of that, sometimes it is easier just to, what you review is so small, what you collect is so small, what you produce is so small. You don't necessarily need that big of a machine to do the work. But if you're finding that the volumes start increasing, that's when it becomes an appropriate thing to consider. You look at the cost, you look at the cost of the humans doing all the work, you look at the cost of the technology, and you just really have to do a cost benefit analysis. So I think it isn't one size fits all. You really do have to look at what's appropriate. And also, is your client okay with you using those tools, especially if it's more cutting edge generative AI? I think having transparency with your clients and telling them that you're using these tools right now, I think it makes a lot of sense. So it just really depends on the burden and the lift. I don't want to say every attorney out there has to be using these tools, but I think there are a lot of ways where they can be useful in different ways. For example, maybe using some of these tools to help with business development or some of your operational work or things like that.
Now, when it comes to talking to the client and making sure that they're okay with you using these tools, have you seen any major pushbacks with clients saying, I don't feel comfortable with that? And if so, what is the reasoning?
Yeah, I think some are saying no. It could be because their data is very sensitive. It could be protected data like HIPAA or something like that, or it's very proprietary. And I think being very risk averse of really wanting to know that data flow, really wanting to make sure that if those tools, those generative AI tools are being used on their data, that it's not ultimately getting pushed into a foundation model for training or another party can access it. And of course, this is a legitimate concern for the legal profession's use of these tools because of privilege waiver concerns and client confidentiality obligations. If a client feels that way, they probably are risk averse for very legitimate reasons. And then you have other clients that they feel comfortable with it. They're aware of the data flow and feel comfortable that their data is not going to go and be used to train those models. And they really want to see their law firms they collaborate with create efficiencies where possible. Because again, the data volumes are increasing and also the data sources are increasing and getting continually complex. And this whole discussion of these tools are going to take our jobs away, I really don't think so, because as technology makes our lives easier, quote unquote, there are other technologies that create complexities to our work. E-discovery for a long time was very focused on a structure, a technology structure based on a cover letter and an attachment. Mm-hmm. And that translated in the technical world in a cover email and an attachment. And so that is a fairly simple structure, but things are getting more complicated. People aren't primarily only using email or standalone docs. Now they're using Teams chats or short form messages or Slack or Discord or text messages. It's so proprietary data sources. And that makes our jobs harder on the e-discovery side. And you would think, especially if you think of short form messages, text messages, Teams chats, you think it's smaller, therefore it's easier. And that's not the case. It is often more difficult because it doesn't fit in well with that cover email, cover letter, attachment type of a thing. And so we're still struggling, I think, as a profession. How do we collect and process it? How do we review it? How do we produce it? And those are usually fairly large volumes. Again, even though they're small, it's still difficult. So how can we use this technology to maybe make our lives easier? Another potential benefit, like looking into the future, is the potential of multimodality. Multimodality is something that's talked about a lot in these generative AI tools. OpenAI talks about it. And really what that means is different type modes of output or different modes of content, meaning text or image or video or audio. And that's something we struggle with in e-discovery because we are very fixed on text-based workflows. Because again, so much of the relevant data has been the email and the attachment. So a very word text heavy type of content, but we're increasingly seeing more video content. We're increasingly seeing audio files, especially if you're collecting from certain regions. People like sending audio notes to each other. So that doesn't fit in well with the rubric of cover attachment. And so there is the benefit as these LLMs, the consumer LLMs, are doing multimodality enhancements where you can do a video output and a text output and an image output all at once. Hopefully, those advances will start trickling into e-discovery, and we won't have to deal with the funky workflows that we have to craft for how are we going to deal with the video data, how are we dealing with audio data, and make it a more cohesive workflow.
That is a great point, that you can now combine all these different sources together and then generate an output that's more easy to understand and organize as the attorney.
That's the hope. I think that it makes a lot of sense. It's a challenge. We do have our laser focus on text because we've been very DT search heavy. But again, the reality is those data sources are getting more complex, more varied. So
I see. Now, I know a major concern for some people is the idea of an AI hallucination. Mm-hmm. So for those listening, that would be where the AI generates an output that didn't really exist in the data set, or maybe something completely outlandish from what the recommendation is. What can be said to help alleviate people's concerns around AI hallucinations?
I think for anyone who's ever managed a review team knows that you have to prepare for the lowest common denominator. You have to prepare for that reviewer who just doesn't get it. And sometimes they can be very confident, just like an LLM can be very confident with its output of, you want a case law on this topic? I couldn't find it, but you know what? I'm going to give you what I think you want. I'm going to predict what I think you want. And it goes without saying humans make mistakes. And in essence, that's what a hallucination is. It is an error. It is incorrect information. given with a lot of confidence and authority. And that just shows, again, in e-discovery, when you're dealing with reviewing documents, there is so much effort put into QCing that first level, whether it's a human or whether it's a machine, because humans make mistakes and machines make mistakes. And that you always have to have, again, like that quote unquote human in the loop. And really, it should be like AI in the loop, I think, because it really puts too much power in the hands of AI. But really, at the very least, like the human is the conductor, really orchestrating the workflows and figuring out who needs to be in what position and in what solo they're going to play. And I think that thinking of where can I strategically put in AI or leverage AI to create those efficiencies, but still knowing that there's going to be human validating those results, I think it's really important. And reading a first draft of someone, it always gets edited. Think of an LLM as maybe a law clerk. You would never take work product from a law clerk and just send it on to a client. You never do that. I mean, it's against our own ethical rules. We shouldn't be doing that. We have an ethical obligation of oversight, especially if you're, a partner. So hallucinations are going to happen. Humans are going to create incorrect work product as well. I think it's just that not assuming that because it's created by a machine, it's correct, having that automation bias, like just realizing like it's not an easy button. In some ways it is, but you still have to validate to make sure it's accurate.
I see. So, hearing you speak on this, I would love your input on who you think in the law firm would be in best position to actually manage this tool and be able to create that oversight. Would an attorney put that on the associate, on another lawyer?
I mean, I think now more than ever, that duty of competency that is addressed in ABA Model Rule 1.1, Comment 8, that obligation of an attorney to maintain competency in technology. It's something that's there, but something that I think people don't really focus on too much because the e-discovery world, that's probably where it comes into play the most. It can be handled by a small group within the larger legal ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But I think the reality is that the various use cases of generative AI in the legal practice beyond e-discovery is fairly large. And these tools are only going to get better, I would hope. So I think that every attorney, unless they're at the twilight years of their career and they're about to retire, you really should be looking at these tools and learning about them, because we would never expect to have a client be okay with us saying, well, I don't use email in my law firm because I'm worried about security issues. Mm-hmm. And there are security issues with email. And so I think initially it will be people from e-discovery practices because we understand the technology well, we understand the need, the process that can go around it. But I think it's very important for broader attorneys to know how to use it as well, because that's the true power of these tools, is it gets the data, the documents to merits counsel faster, as opposed to maybe going through quite so many people. It shortens that path potentially. So it's in their best interest, I would say, to learn it. And then maybe a senior associate is the human in the loop validating the results, just as they would for a junior associate who's drafting something. I think we really have to start thinking of these tools. They are not humans or humanoids. They are a tool that we're using to create efficiencies. And an attorney is always going to have an obligation to validate the results more senior attorney of a junior attorney. That's just not going to go away.
Let's see. Now, it's very important to be able to learn the AI tools and get well acquainted, right? I feel a lot of attorneys, they're incredible at what they do, right? They're very good at practicing law and understanding law. Now, when it comes to a new subject and one that can be as intricate as AI, what are some of the best ways that they can become better educated on AI as a whole, or any way to just easily understand how to give a document that came from AI a quick review?
I mean, I think generally, if you just want to learn more generally about AI, I think LinkedIn has a lot of really good thought leaders, a lot of great information there. If you just want to see what's going on in the world of AI, there are a lot of people posting really great content. I think if you want to just get familiar with using your tools, but you're maybe working at a law firm that doesn't have official approved Gen AI tools, again, which is reasonable, risk averse, really trying to get the lay of the land, use it in your personal life and play around with it. I think that the way you engage with these tools and you prompt back and forth and you iterate, you give an initial prompt, you get an output, you refine it. And it's this interesting interplay, again, because you're talking to it like a human, because it has natural language processing capabilities. Getting used to that interplay and that engagement with technology in a different way, I think is really important. And as far as knowing how to handle validating, QCing, or reviewing the outputs, I think it's going to be the same. I think you shouldn't just assume it's going to be correct because it was created by it. I think you should validate it like you would anything else. And I think you have to look at, similar to the EU AI Act, which is a framework, a legal framework based on risk. I think you have to look at the risk involved with how you want to use the tool. And the higher the risk, the more scrutiny it should get. The lower the risk, maybe not as much. Maybe if you're just brainstorming ideas for a paper that you want to write and you're iterating, like the risk may not be that high. And the need to QC it is just like doing some like gut checks. If it's a topic that you're familiar with, maybe you don't have to do any externally. You can go, well, I think that one's kind of off, but these are good ideas and I'm going to roll with it. So I think it's just like that risk analysis coming into play with how much effort you put into validating or even using, to be quite honest. Like if it's very high risk, if it's very niche SME topic, you may not want to do it, especially like in a time is of the essence situation. And that's another thing maybe we're talking about is as you're playing with these tools, you're integrating them into your workflows, make sure you have time to do that iteration, to play around with it and make sure it's giving you an output you like. Because something we learned in e-discovery using AI, you put a lot of time on the front end to, in essence, work with the model to get the best results. And the benefits are seen on the back end over time. And so it may be frustrating for attorneys on the front end of, oh, it's not giving me the result I want right away. Not realizing that you do have to work with it, because a lot of the discourse on social media is AI is so easy, it makes my life so easy, I can get so much done, but you still have to put work on it on the front end. And it's that long tail of efficiency that comes into play. And once you really start to get comfortable with it and you start thinking, this model and this use case with this input from me, it's giving good results for a first draft, not ever a final draft, a first draft. So that would be my recommendation.
So the AI needs to get better acquainted with the way you use it, right? It's already been trained on the back end in terms of all the language, the LLM, getting in all these inputs, but now it needs to be trained on what you specifically need it for and how it can optimize those results.
Well, and I think also how you submit a request to it, how you talk to it, how you engage with it will dictate the results that you get. So I think it's just getting better at that prompt engineering, that phrase you've probably heard a lot of. How specific do I need to be? How very specific do I need to be to get really what I want? You still have to validate results. I used ChatGPT in my free time. There was an article that I was reading or something that I was reading that it had, in essence, like really good structured information, but in a paragraph format where it was like a header, subheader, and then a summary, header, subheader, summary. And to me, I was like, this would be really useful in a chart, in a spreadsheet. And so I used ChatGPT to convert it to a spreadsheet, the information in columns, because I thought that would be more useful. And it did a great job, but it also only did it for the first 8 things. And there were quite a lot more than that. So I had to look at the results and go, okay, this is great, but please do it for all of the remaining headers. And I still got the output, got an Excel spreadsheet, and I still probably about half of them or more went and just visually checked to make sure the information was right, because it may not be, but it's still, even though I had to do those validations, it's still faster than me, like maybe copying and pasting and
Doing
putting
each
it
one
into an
yourself.
Excel. And that's where in your legal practice, maybe you've written an article or you've written a memo to the client and you want to convert it to a presentation. That's fairly common. You can maybe use that generative AI working off of your work product to maybe convert it to a PowerPoint structure. And that's something, if you can have a machine do some of that for you, that is great. Because a lot of attorneys I know hate building PowerPoint presentations. So
Can't
a
blame them.
great, yeah, great use case.
So it sounds like AI is allowing people to become better communicators or lawyers, attorneys to better get their ideas across to their clients or anyone that they're conducting e-discovery with. They're able to put everything into a simple to understand either presentation just from a bunch of data set points that they don't entirely need to do themselves besides work on that input.
It can just lessen the lift of the human to get information from point A to point B if you're able to give good instructions. It's also good at changing an initial draft that you have to massage the tone, or maybe I've written it too technical. I am fairly technically proficient, I think. Not all of my colleagues are, not all of my clients are. And there's nothing that frustrates clients more than to get super tech speak spoken to them. They don't want that. They're busy. So that would be a great way of, okay, I have a draft email, maybe using Copilot if it's approved by the firm. Like, can you please redraft this so it's not so technically detailed, it's a higher level or something like that. That way you don't have to think about it. You can have something else do it and make your life a little bit easier, or maybe change the tone from persuasive to just more just the facts or whatever, or just the facts too persuasive. Again, just to make your life a little bit easier.
This is great. And I'm glad you're pointing out the ways of utility that it can be done, right? How can it be utilized for more effective output? One thing I wanted to cover is how can someone in a law firm bring up the use case for AI? A lot of times new ideas take some time to implement. So what's the best way to bring up, hey, this is a need we have. AI, this AI particularly is a great solution.
I mean, I think that you have to look at the firm's structure and who is overseeing and approving uses of AI and also just technology. So knowing sometimes there's a working group, sometimes it's a specific person. And I think do your homework. Try to find out like what are the potential costs and be prepared. There's going to have to be some sort of security assessment. I wouldn't necessarily do it yourself, but know that's going to have to be done. You don't want to do something that is going to be done again by that governing group or that individual. And I think just be prepared to address the risk from the concept of confidentiality, privilege waiver, oversight, and what you're doing to minimize those risks or address those concerns. And I think nearly draft it out like a SOP. This is a proposal. This is who would have access to it. This is the risk. This is how we would minimize the risk. This is how we would validate the results. I think thinking from that perspective and presenting it that way and not just casually going, this would be great. That's how I would recommend doing it.
You covered a lot of great points there, and it's the ability to just cover all the bases, right? It's easy to get an idea across and have it more implemented when you just cover all the bases and present it correctly. I'm very curious. We're already talking about AI. I know in your career, you've been using it for many years and have seen it increasingly be adopted by law firms and different industries. Where do you see AI and legal and law going in the next 10 years?
I think, and this has probably been overstated, I think there will be a lot of transformation for a lot of different reasons. I think we're going to see a generational shift in leadership in law firms and corporate legal departments. I think that there's a continued discussion of work-life balance and the potential that generative AI can do to minimize the burden of more routine, time-consuming, tedious tasks. There's benefits there. I also think we're just at the beginning of the development of these tools, and I think that they will only improve because we're already seeing these tools out there in the consumer base getting better. And I think that they will be more targeted to the legal profession and will address the legitimate and necessary concerns that the legal profession has in using them. And I think that we're going to see other things beyond LLMs pushing towards like that multimodality, because again, as the technology we might use gets better and more complex, that means other technologies in the world that our clients may be engaging with and could be relevant for litigation gets more complex that we have to deal with. So I think there's, going to be a lot of progressive change. I could be wrong, but we saw TAR being talked about. I remember when TAR came out and there was chatter of the robots taking the jobs away. And I mean, it did a little bit in some ways. There may be paralegals, some transition to lit support or what have you. I think that there may be some work that diminishes, but there's always going to be other opportunities for other work like AI governance, AI compliance. And that TAR rollout was different because it was a very niche area of the law that was using it. And LLMs are completely different with generative AI. It is consumer-wide available. It's ubiquitous. Anyone can use it. You don't have to know any special syntax to know how to use it. You just start chatting with it, right? So what we're seeing is business leaders, people and companies are rolling up to C-suite the importance of maybe trying out these tools. And it's really at that client leadership level, then going to the firm leadership level. And there's obviously a lot of attention. It's driving a lot of attention. It's not going to go away. So I think there's a lot of transformation, but you still have to be prepared. Have your processes in place. SOPs are a great thing to have. Education and training for your attorneys. And I'm not talking about like a one and done. Like AI literacy is very important. And even if your client's core business is not data and technology, the degree to which they rely on data and technology for their core business is so important that we're not going to get away from technology. Technology is going to become more and more present in our legal practice. So
you're preaching. This is a good point. You got to be able to train. You have to be able to build these structures and systems and have these documentations like SOPs. And one piece I wanted to touch on here was the use of frameworks. I know you wrote an incredible article on how AI can be implemented on the framework of a NIST framework, NIST. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so NIST last year, 2023, published an AI management framework, and it's completely voluntary. And pretty much what it does is it breaks down for the life cycle of an AI tool, not just at initiation or development of, but if you are integrating an AI system, and not just generative AI, but AI into your business, these are things to be aware of. They have high-level pillars, 3 core pillars that they then break down into subsections. And really, I think what we talked a lot about here is encapsulated in that framework. I really encourage everyone to go and check it out. And it talks a lot about communication, education, getting cross-sectional stakeholders. I've had some clients ask me, who's the owner of AI compliance, of AI governance? Where is that going to fall? And repeatedly, we're seeing in this, we're seeing in AI specific certification, it's multi-stakeholder. It's not going to just be one. And it needs to be ownership and buy-in from the top level down to the people like handling the management of these tools. So I just really recommend as a good starting point, going to NIST. They have that framework. They've also published other guidelines that are more specific. They have one on synthetic data. They have one, I think, that's more cybersecurity focused. This is a great resource just for, hey, that might be a great starting point. And then I would say any company that isn't quite sure what to do with AI compliance, and they know now AI is being potentially regulated in some level of compliance, I would go through an AI mapping exercise similar to what we've done in the past because of GDPR. Like, what is all the data we have? What sort of compliance obligations do we have? This year, going into the beginning of next year, you go and do an AI mapping exercise, because some AI systems may have been in use in a company for a long time and we haven't maybe been tracking it. So go and talk to the key stakeholders of each department, not just maybe IT, because you never know when shadow tech is out there. And you really need to understand all these tools that are being used, in what way is in an area that might require compliance, just so you can know what that obligation, that lift might be on the compliance side, and you can start planning for a budget in 2025. So
giving it a full top-down approach, really for your whole business as a holistic view of your business and where AI fits into that.
Right. Exactly. There is the specter of AI audits in our futures. A lot of companies understandably don't want to be out that cost right now because there are still a lot of guidelines that are pending. The EU AI office is working on it. NIST is working on that as well. So why be out the cost of maybe having to do it again once guidelines are out? But if you can just get the lay of the land, and these are all of the AI systems that we use, these are the potential risks associated with it, maybe when it comes to data, protected data, maybe when it comes to, how it's being used. If it's being used in HR, might have more scrutiny than if it's used in some other very operational way to make things easier, So I think just consider it like house cleaning mode for 2024, just so you have your house in order, so you can be able to be prepared in 2025.
This is perfect to let people hit the ground running whenever it comes time to implement any of these new guidelines that are released.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question because we're coming up to the end of our conversation, and that's, what is your spiciest take on the legal industry today?
I think there are going to be disruptors out there, maybe. I think that how we use tools, I think that there are a lot of disruptors out there in access to justice, which I think is really exciting to see, having lower cost solutions for pro se litigants or public defenders. I think that's really exciting to see, because I think something we can't forget in these conversations of generative AI is access to justice. And we don't want to be in a situation where the only people who can use these tools are the people that can pay for the higher cost things. But luckily, there's some thought leaders out there new to the legal profession, legal tech, and they're not married to the structures of our last 10 to 15 years of e-discovery, and they're just doing their own thing, but very focused on, again, access to justice. So I think that's really exciting to see, because access to justice is a very important thing we should all be concerned about from our legal profession, whether it's doing pro bono work or advocating for disadvantaged people. I think that's a really great thing to come out of some of this. So
it's a great take. Well, thank you so much, Kassi, for joining us here today. This has been extremely insightful. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And of course, we'll catch you on the next one. Between the Briefs is brought to you by Steno. To find out more about Steno and how we combine exceptional court reporting and litigation support services to deliver a superior litigation experience, visit steno.com. That's STENO.com. And then make sure to search for Between the Briefs in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Steno, thanks for listening.